we should be saying, if you get caught doing this, bad things are going to happen to you. And absolute minimum, expelling Russian intelligence officials from one country and saying you'll never go to a civilized country again as long as you live is quite a good deterrent. Because that it's taken us so long to get some publicly available details about what's been going on. I was the first witness to the Intelligence and Security Committee inquiry into Russia in the summer of 2018, and much of the detail we've heard today was being talked about in the background even then. The idea that Russia gets into people's emails, steals them, and then leaks them in order to distrust and dissension in Britain. We do now have the names of two Russians who are involved in this, and no doubt they'll be trembling at the thought they can't come to Britain anymore. But we are terribly late on this, and we've still not really got to grips with the question of dirty money in our politics. And in fact, anti-corruption NGO Spotlight on Corruption has written to the National Crime Agency today, I think just coincidentally, to say, what are you doing to enforce the law and find people who are using dirty money to try and bend our decision making.
How useful do you think this kind of operation then, Edward, has been to Russia? How damaging to us? And from what you're saying there, you feel that we've just been so complacent?
Well, the trouble with these influence operations is you often don't know how life would have been different otherwise. So to take a hypothetical example, because these people can sue, if the Leave campaign hadn't had so much money from people who are extraordinarily good fortune, enjoy extraordinarily good fortune in their business dealings, would that have changed the result of the referendum? We don't really know. I think the real reason was that the Remain campaign was very stupid. If Hillary Clinton's emails and senior Democrats hadn't been hacked and leaked in 2016, would Donald Trump have still won? Well, probably he would have done, because the Clinton campaign was extremely lazy and incompetent and got a lot of things wrong. So often these influence, one can say the operations have been going on. We can say that it was there at the margins. It's much harder to say, was it decisive?
Yeah, interesting to see some of the detail of how this thing was working, where you have professional agents, spies, officials pulling strings, but also the use of these subcontractors in different places. And I was reading just the other day the way that Vladimir Putin has now in the pipeline a big increase in the budget for security and defence, and no doubt this sort of thing. So that means the threat will now just only get greater with more resources poured into it.
Absolutely, the threat is getting greater, and one of the problems is that fakery, producing fake audio and fake video and fake pictures and fake text, is getting easier all the time because of the capabilities of artificial intelligence. So it would be quite trivial for someone to produce a video of you saying that you didn't think Times Radio was any good and people should listen to the BBC instead, or a video of me saying that everyone should give their money to the Conservative Party. This can be done now, and we don't really have the sort of the mental and the cultural resilience to interpret what's going on. We saw this. There are elections happening on the continent where we've already seen these deep fakes being used. And again, one can't be absolutely sure they're decisive. What one can say, going to get more and more of this, and we don't really have an answer to it.
Yeah, well, that's my next question, really. How well defended are we? The Prime Minister was asked about this earlier today, and he said he was pretty confident, but he's the Prime Minister with all sorts of cyber protection around him. Not the case, with the average journalist or maybe low-ranking, middle-ranking civil servant. Is there such a thing as an effective defence?
There is effective defence, but there's no single silver bullet that gives you the defence. So one big line of defence is on the way we think and interpret information. And so countries like Finland are extremely good at training people from the age they learn to read to think carefully about what they're consuming and whether some might be trying to manipulate them. So that's what they call cognitive resilience is extremely important. So that's one thing. Another thing is we have to get the tech platforms to be a lot more responsible about their role in collusion with all kinds of malefactors, whether it's pornographers and people who do child abuse images, whether it's people who do online scams, or people who in this hostile state activity are trying to attack our democracy and our decision making. All this happens over the phones and the computer networks and the other things that are run by these tech companies. And so far, they're not really playing anything like the role they should in defending us. And then the third thing, of course, is deterrence. We should be saying if you get caught doing this, bad things are going to happen to you. And absolute minimum, expelling Russian intelligence officials from one country and saying you'll never go to a civilized country again as long as you live is quite a good deterrent.
Yeah, well, I guess that is one. I mean, Edward, do we do the same? Are we up to the same sort of tricks the other way?
We invented political warfare back in the late 1930s and early 1940s. There was a man called Sefton Delmer who set up fake Nazi radio stations which would broadcast what sounded like authentic Nazi propaganda, but spiced up with little bits of disinformation about food shortages and epidemics and corruption and so on. And this has been completely forgotten now in this country. But we were quite good at attacking the dictatorship, particularly the Nazi dictatorship in Europe during the Second World War. And we were also quite good at doing it during the Cold War. But we've largely lost our capability of doing that.
Tell me, Edward, were you hacked and spied on? If there's a journalist anywhere that it would be worth Russia, I don't know, hacking emails and keeping an eye on, it would be you. I mean, were you spied on as far as you know?
Well, I certainly was when I lived behind the Iron Curtain. I was constantly followed, bugged, arrested, beaten up, interrogated, harassed, deported, you name it. And it was all pretty overt then. And certainly when I was living in Moscow in the late 90s and early noughties, one felt the cold breath of the FSB on one's neck every now and again. And I think that in fact, I occasionally wrote for something called the Institute for Statecraft, which was a sort of NGO sort of pressure group set up to try and rekindle Britain's capability of political warfare. And they rather unwisely failed to guard their internal communications and databases properly. And it was all leaked, and I had no problem about it because my byline appeared on their website. I had nothing to hide, but people who'd been cooperating with them privately, particularly in other European countries, then found their names splashed all over the internet as supposedly collaborators with the British state. So these things do go on. But one key thing is it's up to us how we mind about it. And if someone produces an email where Edward Lucas and John Pienaar are saying disobliging things about other people, the public instinct is say, oh gosh, that's interesting, that was a private message, aren't they hypocrites, they're saying one thing in private and another thing in public. That's the wrong reaction. What we should say is private conversations are private, and if you don't have the right to have a private conversation or private email exchange, you're not living in a free country. And this kind of prurient attitude to private messages is something that Russia is really willing and able to exploit and has done so.
Well, there is an interesting thought, Edward. Lovely to have you on. Thank you. Edward Lucas, their Times columnist, and as you can hear there, a specialist in security.